history documentaries.
What if I told you that an 800-year war began with a handful of rebels hiding in a cave? That kingdoms were born on battlefields and empires collapsed with a single siege? This is the story of the Reconquista, told through 10 battles that changed history forever. The year is 711. Muslim armies from North Africa cross the Strait of Gibraltar, shattering the Visigothic kingdom in a single campaign. Within years, nearly all Iberia falls under the Crescent banner. But in the shadow of the mountains, in lonely valleys and stone-walled towns, a spark of resistance survives. Over the next 8 centuries, Christian kingdoms, Asturias, Leon, Castile, Aragon, Navarre, and Portugal, will rise and fall, unite and splinter, in a relentless war to reclaim the land. This is the Reconquista, a struggle of faith, ambition, and survival. These are the top 10 battles that changed its course. Battle of Covadonga, c. 722, the spark of resistance. In the high mountains of Asturias, a small band of Christian fighters led by Pelayo, takes refuge in the cave of Covadonga. The Umayyad governor sends a force to crush them, confident in superior numbers. But the narrow gorge turns the Muslim advantage into a trap. Rocks tumble from above, arrows rain down, and the Christian warriors charge from hidden positions. The Muslim force is thrown into chaos and retreats down the slopes. Though a small skirmish by later standards, Covadonga becomes legend. The Asturian chronicles frame it as divine intervention, the moment God chose to preserve a Christian seed in Iberia. Our Lord delivered them from the hands of their enemies, that they might plant the vine anew, one account declares. From this victory grows the kingdom of Asturias, the first Christian realm of the Reconquista. To later generations, Covadonga was not remembered as just another skirmish. It was remembered as the moment the Christian North refused to die. The geography of Asturias played a critical role. Steep cliffs, echoing valleys, and thick forests turned the battlefield into a fortress. The Muslims, who were used to fighting in open plains where cavalry dominated, suddenly found themselves trapped in terrain that negated their advantages. Pelayo's followers, though few in number, fought with the desperation of men defending their last refuge. Their knowledge of the land allowed them to strike from above and vanish into the rocks. The ambush caused panic, and the retreating Muslim force lost even more men to the treacherous mountain paths. For Christian chroniclers, this victory was nothing less than divine providence. They wove tales of heavenly intervention, of arrows bouncing harmlessly off shields and rocks striking with unnatural force. Whether exaggerated or not, these stories gave the small kingdom of Asturias a powerful origin myth. It showed that God had not abandoned Hispania. He had planted the seed of rebirth in the mountains. Covadonga's importance was not in its numbers, but in its symbolism. It was proof that resistance could succeed, and from this seedling victory, centuries of Reconquista would grow. Battle of Roncesvalles Pass, 778. Charlemagne's retreat. Charlemagne's Frankish army, returning from a campaign in Iberia, wins through the Pyrenean pass of Roncesvalles. The main mission, to secure Zaragoza, has failed after delicate Muslim-Christian politics turned against him. As the baggage train stretches thin in the narrow pass, Basque warriors descend from the forested slopes. They strike the rearguard, led by Roland, prefect of the Breton March. The Franks are overwhelmed. Roland and his men fight to the last. Though not a direct Muslim-Christian clash, Roncesvalles shapes the northern frontier. It curtails Frankish influence in Spain, leaving the Christian kingdoms to chart their own path in the Reconquista. Immortalized in the Song of Roland, the battle becomes a medieval epic of loyalty and sacrifice. The defeat at Roncesvalles was not just a military setback, it was a political failure that reshaped the course of Iberian history. Charlemagne had entered Spain with high hopes, expecting Muslim governors to rally to his banner against Córdoba. Instead, he found himself entangled in rivalries he could not control. The refusal of Zaragoza to surrender turned the campaign into a waste, and retreat was the only option. The Basques seized this moment. They had no loyalty to Córdoba or to Charlemagne, but they fiercely defended their independence. Attacking, in the dense forests of the Pyrenees, they chose their moment carefully. The rearguard, stretched thin and burdened with supplies, was isolated. The Frankish knights, famous for heavy cavalry charges, were helpless in the narrow wooded slopes. Roland's stand became legendary. Chroniclers claimed he blew his great horn, the Oliphant, with such force that his temples burst before he died. The story, transformed into epic poetry centuries later, turned a local ambush into a myth of knightly valor and Christian martyrdom. For the Reconquista, the consequences were clear. Iberia would not be conquered by outside powers. The failure of Charlemagne ensured that the fight against Muslim rule would be led by the local Christian kingdoms themselves: Asturias, Leon, Navarre, Aragon, forging their own destinies without Frankish domination. Battle of Albelda, 859. Christians versus Vikings and Moors. The middle 9th century sees a strange alliance. Muslim Córdoba hiring Viking mercenaries to raid Christian lands. At Albelda in La Rioja, the forces of Ordoño Farnes of Asturias and García Íñiguez of Pamplona confront this combined threat. The Christian army maneuvers to cut the Viking cavalry off from their Muslim allies, forcing the battle into the narrow river valley. Fierce hand-to-hand fighting ensues, Norse axes clashing with Asturian spears. The victory secures the northern Christian kingdoms and sends a message: even combined Muslim and Viking power can be resisted. Chroniclers mark it as a rare moment of unity between Leon and Pamplona, a cooperation that will echo in later Reconquista campaigns. The clash at Albelda highlights the complex, shifting alliances of early medieval Iberia. The Vikings had first appeared off the coasts of Spain in the mid-9th century, terrifying coastal towns with sudden raids. But here, their presence was even stranger, hired as mercenaries by Muslim Córdoba to strike Christian territories inland. For many chroniclers, the sight of Norsemen fighting alongside Muslim cavalry seemed like a nightmare of foreign powers uniting against Christendom. The Christian leaders, Ordoño I and García Íñiguez, understood the danger. If Córdoba and Viking raiders could establish a lasting partnership, the fragile northern kingdoms would be crushed. At Albelda, they seized the chance to confront this threat head-on, choosing the narrow valley as the battlefield neutralized the Vikings' shock cavalry and forced the battle into brutal, close combat. Chroniclers describe the chaos: Norsemen swinging great axes, Asturian warriors thrusting long spears, while Navarrese swordsmen struck from the flanks. The Christian victory was more than military, it was psychological. It proved that no matter how exotic or terrifying the enemy, resistance could succeed. Perhaps most importantly, Albelda showcased the power of Christian cooperation. Leon and Pamplona, usually rivals, fought as one. This spirit of alliance would later reappear on a grander scale in battles like Las Navas de Tolosa, Battle of Simancas, 939, Ramiro II versus Abd al-Rahman III. The Caliph of Córdoba, Abd al-Rahman III, leads a massive army north into Leon, seeking to crush Christian resistance once and for all. King Ramiro II gathers a coalition from Leon, Castile, and Navarre. The two forces meet on the plains near Simancas. An eclipse darkens the sky on the eve of battle, interpreted by Christian chroniclers as a sign of divine favor. Over 3 days, cavalry charges crash against shield walls, archers thin the enemy ranks, and the Christian lines hold firm. Finally, a counterattack drives the Muslim army into retreat. The victory halts Córdoba's northern expansion and cements Ramiro II's reputation as one of the great warrior kings of Leon. Abd al-Rahman III was one of the most formidable rulers of Al-Andalus. Under his leadership, Córdoba had become a caliphate, rich and powerful, stretching across much of Iberia. His campaign north in 939 was meant to be decisive, a demonstration that no Christian king could defy the might of Córdoba. Ramiro II, however, was equally determined. He called upon his vassals and allies, assembling men from Leon, Castile, and Navarre. Chroniclers note that his army was far smaller, but morale was bolstered by the omen of the solar eclipse that darkened the sky. To Christians, it was a divine sign that God's hand was upon them. To the Muslims, it may have been unsettling, a shadow across what was meant to be their triumph. The battle raged for 3 days. Muslim cavalry launched charge after charge, but the Christian lines held with grim determination. Archers inflicted heavy losses, and counterattacks gradually wore down the caliph's forces. When Ramiro unleashed his reserves, the Muslim army broke. The victory at Simancas did not destroy Córdoba, but it shattered the image of its invincibility. Ramiro II emerged as one of the most celebrated kings of Leon, remembered as a warrior who stood firm against overwhelming might and preserved the Christian North for another generation. Siege of Barbastro, 1064, the First Crusade before the Crusades. Pope Alexander II calls for Christian knights from across Europe to aid in the capture of Barbastro in Aragon. Forces arrive from France, Catalonia, and Italy, laying siege to the fortified Muslim city. For months, siege engines batter the walls, while starvation and disease weaken the defenders. At last, the walls fall. The city is sacked, its population massacred or enslaved. A grim foreshadowing of later crusading warfare. Though Barbastro is retaken by Muslim forces within a few years, the siege is significant. It marks one of the first papal-sanctioned holy wars in Iberia, blending local Reconquista aims with the broader concept of Christendom's defense, an idea that will explode in the First Crusade just decades later. The Siege of Barbastro stands as a chilling preview of the Crusades. Until then, most Reconquista battles had been local affairs, Christian kings pushing against Muslim neighbors. But in 1064, Pope Alexander II called for warriors across Europe to join the fight, granting them spiritual rewards. French knights, Italian contingents, and Catalan forces answered, swelling the army that descended upon Barbastro. For the defenders, the siege was brutal. Engines hurled stones day and night, towers crept closer to the walls, and food supplies dwindled. Chroniclers describe famine inside the city, with civilians suffering alongside soldiers. When the walls finally fell, what followed shocked even some of the attackers. A wholesale massacre. Men, women, and children were slaughtered or sold into slavery. Though the city fell back into Muslim hands only a few years later, the significance of Barbastro was ideological. It was one of the first moments when war in Iberia was explicitly framed as a religious crusade, blessed by the Pope and infused with the language of holy war. This concept, Iberian War as part of Christendom's greater struggle, would echo powerfully when the First Crusade began in 1095. Barbastro was, in many ways, the dress rehearsal. Battle of Ourique, 1139. Birth of the Kingdom of Portugal. The summer sun beats down on the Alentejo plain. Afonso Henriques, Count of Portugal, commands a small but determined Christian force deep in enemy territory. The Almoravid army before him is larger, battle-hardened, and confident of victory. Legend says that on the night before the battle, Afonso has a vision of Christ, promising him triumph. Whether miracle or morale, the next day his men fight with ferocious resolve. Afonso breaks the enemy lines, scattering the Muslim host. In the aftermath, his troops proclaim him King of Portugal. From this day, Portugal stands as an independent, Christian kingdom, its borders steadily pushing southward over the next 2 centuries. Chroniclers would later declare, "At Ourique, God gave us Portugal." The Battle of Ourique occupies a legendary place in Portuguese memory. Though historians debate the details, even the exact location, its symbolic weight is immense. Facing an enemy far stronger on paper, Afonso's courage and leadership became the foundation of a nation. The legend of his vision was especially powerful. Chroniclers claim that Christ appeared to Afonso, assuring him of victory and destiny. This miracle narrative gave Portugal not only a king, but also a divine purpose. When Afonso's army routed the Almoravids, the moment was seen as proof that Portugal was chosen by God to exist. In the wake of victory, Afonso's soldiers lifted him upon their shields and hailed him not merely as count, but as king. This act of battlefield acclamation gave Portugal independence from Leon and legitimacy in the eyes of Europe. Over time, the story of Ourique was retold again and again, shaping Portuguese national identity. Strategically, it marked the beginning of Portugal's push southward, eventually reaching the Algarve. Symbolically, it was the birth of a kingdom. From Ourique onward, Portugal was no longer a vassal territory but a sovereign realm, destined to play a major role not only in the Reconquista, but in the age of discoveries to come.
Please subscribe and look for more documentaries at Swords and Shadows.